This video will explain the symbolism behind pink and yellow eyes, the bad memories that composed one of Undertale's most mysterious enemies, an elaborate dive into the hidden in plain sight colors that show off the four horsemen of Deltarune, the in fact very specific and systematic function the heroes fulfill within the prophecy, and most importantly, Kris Dreamer, who like Gaster, has been split across time and space. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Alphys might work faster, but the old royal scientist, Dr. W.D. Gaster, one day he vanished without a trace. They say he shattered across time and space. How can I say so without fear? I'm holding a piece of him right here.
Let's get right into this. Thus far, I've truly pushed the envelope and have been testing my luck with how outrageous and out of left field my theories can become. And make zero mistake, I believe at least 70% of my predictions for Deltarune will come to pass in some capacity. I dive into discussions looking mostly solely at the media I'm familiar with, rather than crunching numbers or file digging. Because I genuinely feel, as fun and interactive as all of those things can be, these things more often than not serve as distractions from the things that are staring at us right in the face. Today I'll be reopening a wound that was always, and always will continue to be, contentious within Deltarune discourse, at least until Deltarune is fully out and the story is concluded. So today, let's rip off the band-aid right away. Kris Dreamer is in fact Chara from Undertale, but I'll take it a step further and explain that Kris Dreamer is also Frisk. Today's discussion will explain how I believe Kris, not unlike Gaster, has been split across time and space, but unlike Gaster, where he met his fate within Undertale, Kris will meet their fate at some point during the ending of Deltarune that will render their essence to pieces. And through Undertale retroactively, we see every piece of them operating within their newly assigned reality, functioning with different rules, and more importantly, different roles. Many of you may be looking at my custom visual with confusion, but I know a certain group of JRPG fans that are looking at this and know fully what I'm going to be getting at here. But before we return to this visual, let's work our way from the roots of this theory. We'll start by dissecting some oddities with Undertale's most mysterious enemy, a certain amalgamate you may know as Memory Head. The Memory Head is truly the most bizarre enemy amongst the amalgams of Undertale. For starters, even though Undertale has been out for the better part of an entire decade at this point, exactly zero conclusions could be made of the monsters that compose this entity. Despite every other amalgamate having its compositions clear no matter how abstract or elaborate the designs could become, there is still no uniform answers to what exactly composes the Memory Head. Memory Heads also seem like they're the only amalgamate not to reunite with its fellow creatures during the True Pacifist run, as to where every other amalgamate gets its happy ending and happy reunion. Now, pretty much everything I've said up to this point has zero bearing on anything. These are just weird facts about a weird enemy in Undertale. And if these details were standalone things, it would be fair to assess them as interesting but negligible details. But from here on out, everything surrounding this bizarre outlier within an outlier of an enemy begins to paint a far more disturbing picture. A picture that I believe shows the aftermath of something that went terribly wrong. During your bouts with all of the amalgamates, all of your selectable act options have been selectable at some point or another earlier in the game, and they align with some sort of monster that you've encountered in the past. These actions being things like complimenting, ignoring, petting, etc. But okay, let's see what action we need to take in order to pacify the Memory Head. Well, for starters, it seems like it's the single time in the whole game where the act menu has you pull out your cell phone. Aside of that, these enemies seem to communicate back to you through what I could only best describe as some other form of garbage noise. Let's take a listen to that. So This thing's main method of communication seems to be tied to the way we most often contact the most mysterious character within the lore of two separate games. As stated earlier, we've been completely stumped as to what monsters may compose this atrocity. I mean, even in Hometown, the cemetery has monsters that we've seen associated with most of the amalgamates. Maybe it's as simple as looking at Deltarune for some answers. Maybe one of Deltarune's monsters could give us a better idea into what the memory head may be composed of. After all, these games are no strangers to time and space shenanigans, so maybe something ended up in reverse. But no, none of these enemies look anything like the memory head. And when you follow this train of thought, eventually you'll find yourself squinting really hard at them. And then that's when it hits you. You see something truly out of place. It would seem that memory heads are somehow composed of Deltarune's secret boss encounters. At first, I thought I was foolish enough to believe that these designs were purely coincidental, that the 6 faces here were completely just a Rorschach test of some sort, that were abstract and were playing tricks on my eyes. Hell, I thought everyone was just seeing things that they wanted to see. Chapter 5 even came along and I still tried to ignore the strikingly feline upper third of this abomination. But then I remembered something that, for lack of a better term, radicalized me on a whole new way of thinking. The encounter itself is mysterious enough, but what's more mysterious is the spoils you reap post-encounter with the memory head. Where in your inventory you'll find something called a bad memory, an item that no matter how hard you try to get rid of it, it always just comes back. An item truly befitting of its name. Consuming it will damage you 1 HP. That is, unless you're incredibly low on health, 3 or below, in which case its effect completely alters. It will then serve to max out your HP, and I think that detail alone is so telling. Considering that they had this effect on Frisk, a character that has no reason, or better yet, any form of relation to the memory head before the events of Undertale, yet somehow could undergo 2 very distinct effects from coming to contact with this one item, makes me believe that this item has to be lore relevant. And what I propose is that these bad memories are from Frisk's past life, their past life being Kris's journey through Deltarune. Now, why am I so confident these belong to Kris explicitly? I completely understand that this sounds like a huge logic leap and a ridiculous assertion to make off of so little that we have on this enemy. But the truth is, I don't think Toby does things for no reason. And now I want to get into the meat of why I believe that the memory head is in fact a lost asset of Kris, amongst a plethora of other lost assets of Kris that we'll be talking about shortly. But before that, we have to tackle why the memory head takes this form. Each of the secret bosses thus far has served as an end of chapter reward, a bookmark to our adventure, chapter by chapter. While some bosses are more thematically tied with certain characters than others, regardless of narrative relevance, Kris, by proxy of their soul, they're pretty much always directly involved. In each of these fights, they're key for success in the battle. Something that's worth noting right now is that for us the player, the bosses can be seen as punishing hurdles that cause frustration, but more often than not, and for me personally, they are essentially the highlights of the experience, bringing unique gameplay gimmicks and memorable music. But this is the part where I need to also remind everyone that you, yes you, and me, we again are not Kris. Though we interface with Deltarune as a game, for Kris, no matter how fun, more on that later, the adventures are with their friends, at the end of the day, this is a desperate journey or a trial that Kris must endure in order to save their world. Not to mention, after their reaction to Spamton, it would be so easy to see why Kris wouldn't exactly be seeing all of these secret fights as some sort of exciting new thing. I would argue that Kris would likely see many of these encounters as flat out bad, because the reality is, barring Gerson, these battles are essentially Deltarune in its heaviest and most emotionally taxing form. Just imagine how Kris interprets the Mad Mew Mew confrontation while they're under the veil of our control. It's almost like a mirror composed of pure irony. that I see as particularly brutal in a way because, in a sense, Kris is witnessing someone go through a resolution for what's essentially their same exact predicament, but wrapped up in mere minutes, when only God knows how much longer we're going to be wrestling back and forth with Kris for control of the narrative. People seem to have this optimistic idea that eventually we'll resolve everything just like Mad Mew Mew, but you have to recall, Kris also isn't Mad Mew Mew. Not everybody's problems conclude in the same way. And I'm not even against the idea of some sort of resolution arc between Kris and us the player, because it would be a beautiful thing to see. But my point is, that's no guarantee. And depending on your decisions, I'm almost certain that this option is completely out of your hands depending on what you've done so far. I say all this to drive home the point that if Deltarune is to end in some sort of tragedy, it would make sense that these secret bosses, these pillars of world building, would serve as nothing but bad memories, specifically for Kris, a congealed physical mass of all of the twisted trials they endured to fulfill some sort of mission that's unknown to us as the player as of yet. They will boil down to essentially being bad memories. As I've stated, I'm proposing Kris's very essence is strewn about Undertale in different ways, and this is the first stop. Their removed traumas given physical forms and expelled. But what remains of Kris besides their trauma? Well, this is where we have to get into the heart of what I believe is at hand here. Something that's best to establish from the beginning is that it's safe to say that Kris is far from a one-dimensional protagonist. I would almost argue there's no protagonist quite like them. They have some truly challenging issues grasping their identity as a human, and I'd also be able to wager even with their identity as a hero in some capacity. You see, ever since we've witnessed the flashback of Kris wearing horns in Chapter 3, many have had this idea that Rousey was conjured out of Kris's ideal self, a fantasy of how they would be as a monster. And just to be clear, the whole idea of Rousey being Kris's horns in the light world is pretty much irrelevant to what comes next. This is mostly just to illustrate that Rousey is likely in some capacity what Kris either aspired to be like or aspires to be like in real time. More to say that thematically, this is the culmination that would best describe Rousey, or at least a potential reason for their existence as some sort of imaginary friend that's clearly some sort of higher being or entity within the dark world. Because I really do doubt that it's purely a coincidence he dons the form of a dreamer due to pure happenstance. And with how close he is to Kris, it makes me believe that Rousey, in a sense, pacifies Kris, essentially functioning as some sort of coping mechanism, especially in relation to not being close to their brother anymore, seemingly due to their move to college. All of this to say that I believe Kris wishes to be kind and help others through compassion. I mean, for a while, Kris was the only character capable of acting throughout the journey, at least within the initial chapter. And I think that says a lot, and it shows us that they're more than capable of being kind regardless of our influence over them. I mean, they definitely don't co-sign some of our actions in the weird route. And no matter how much deviousness may lurk beneath the surface, Kris is not a complete monster. Or I guess if you have a mean sense of humor, they're not a monster at all. But keep in mind, they specialized in acting. The first time we as the player encounter Kris, no matter who you are, assuming you've played Undertale, your brain will automatically begin making parallels, purely on account of their visual design. I know the first time that I saw Kris, it was impossible for me not to think of Chara, and I think this was more than intentional. The visual parody between these two is almost overwhelming. Striped shirt, check. Bowl cut, check. Even the cute tiny gut bump, check. But what unnerves the player most on an initial playthrough is mostly the color scheme, admittedly. That is, in terms of Kris's light world design. And almost as if to keep us as the players on our toes the first time we meet them, come the end of Chapter 1, we're left with a scene of Kris removing us from their body and giving us all an all too familiar look into the camera, with an all too familiar knife to boot. The thing is, we understand that Kris has a trickster spirit, and calling Chara a trickster is admittedly the understatement of the century, considering the true devastation that this entity enacts. But that is to say that these two adoptive children of the Dreamer household both don yellow and green attire and have eyes that glint red with determination before exerting their power in a fourth wall breaking way, and may have a little more in common than purely incidental overlaps. Just because Toby made Undertale as some proof of concept for Deltarune doesn't magically mean we should neglect all of these core overlapping details between these two characters. Especially not out of some irrational fear that people are going to make fun of your opinion on a video game. Now, I believe there's even more at play here between these two characters, but before touching on that, let's talk about Frisk. Frisk is the moving protagonist of Undertale. Frisk is exceptionally unique in the sense that they handle their altercations through using act commands and basically rejecting violence whenever they can for the most part. A true pacifist, not unlike Rouse, which we've established seems to represent some sort of machination of Kris's will to solve things peacefully. Even beyond solving altercations, it helps them make new allies. Frisk would seem to be the manifestation of Kris's compassion that would do anything in their power to resist harming people. We see this part of Kris manifest when they thrash us about for mistreating Noelle in the weird route. Though that manifests in a kind of violent way, it shows that Kris really does care about their friends, and that they were truly doing everything in their power to resist our control. We even get to see this compassionate side to Kris, specifically with how they treat Suzie. That is within the supplementary material. Even when Suzie would outwardly antagonize them, Kris would simply smile. And after chapter 5, I'm starting to wonder if Kris's feelings were maybe a little more complicated towards Suzie than we initially could know. But that aside, and on a slightly lighter note, Kris and Frisk also have a penchant for being rather flirtatious. I made a reference to the color overlap between Kris and Chara, but what do you know? With a simple trip to the dark world, we now realize Kris and Frisk have visual parity with the color blue, light blue in particular. And I want to make a quick aside and say I'm not too sure if this scarf is pink or purple depending on the angle, so I'm not going to immediately ruffle any feathers with that. Regardless, I find it truly fascinating that I've mentioned the world of Deltarune must be influenced by the waves of darkness to eventually transform and become Undertale in some way. And now Frisk dons blue by default as their color scheme, almost as if they're intended to be the hero of the underground. Because come the start of Undertale, they would already be in a dark world depending on how you look at it. And I'm sorry if that confuses you, please go check out some of my older videos. I believe any of the last two will suffice in explaining why I believe something so insane, but trust me, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, them staying blue almost plays into the whole idea of them being the hero yet again, just in a new context. Almost as if Kris's wish to become someone different and someone they feel worthy to be a true hero manifested with another chance as a child. And I know this age stuff is super contentious within the theory community when it comes to the whole idea of Deltarune being a prequel. But trust me, I'm gonna get to that and we're gonna tackle that head on as well. But first we need to talk more on colors. Because the more we talk on Kris, to Chara, and to Frisk in this triangle, the more I believe that these accenting colors are symbolic of two other characters. And on paper, this may sound completely ludicrous, but once I get into the meat of this, the yellow of Chara and the purple of Frisk are going to be a lot more uncomfortable to ignore. Purple and yellow. We've discussed Suzie at great length on this channel, so I'm going to approach her from a bit of a different angle. I've often categorized Suzie as this force of destruction that will destroy a hometown, and by this much I can completely stand by. However, there's another angle of looking at Suzie that would actually correlate with her not as a figure of chaos, but in fact as a paradigm of order. Order in this context being making sure that our adventures never end, or in other words, that Deltarune the video game stays a game. Think about a pacifist run in Undertale. You're rewarded with puzzles, multiple variations of gameplay, through a grand total of 5 different heart modes, and lore served up to you through not only interactions but also cutscenes. It's where Undertale still feels most like a game, and in a sense, A pacifist run has the adventures befitting of the essence of Kris and Suzie, two heroes that can reach people in unconventional ways. Now shifting our focus to Noelle. Noelle's desires are essentially predicated on stress testing not only the game's boundaries, but our relationship with the entire game world. Desiring something beyond the borders and to take flight far off somewhere, even if it results in endangering and or hurting her friends. She has a longing to escape the surroundings that confine her path in life, and Noelle would do just about anything to see a modicum of change. This is not unlike when we use Frisk as a vehicle for chaos, feeding the essence we, the player, are familiar with as Chara from Undertale. The thing that stems when we grow tired of the same old song and dance, and we desire to explore new things that perhaps we were all just better off leaving alone. I find it best to address something a lot of you may be wondering, or even make you want to immediately dismiss this idea that the yellow accents in Kris's design may represent Noelle in any way. Because by default, they inherently wear these colors. There's no sort of alteration happening for them to don this. However, I feel like I have a fairly reasonable explanation to help justify this potential big hole. The answer isn't the most exciting, but it's more than reasonable to assume since Kris was raised alongside the Holiday family, maybe their natural preferences and temperament would likely lean and bias towards overlapping with Noelle, considering they have some sort of intimate shared bond from some things that we haven't entirely seen yet. And even aside from Noelle, we know Kris to be a close associate of Carol Holiday, yet another avenue of familiarity within the Holiday family. And while we're still on color here, let's address the pink and yellow eyes. I'll start very forthcoming and say that I'll be very liberal with my personal interpretation of these colors. And I just want to say that I personally believe pink applies just as much to Suzie as the color purple, mostly due to her dark-world appearance. And quite simply put, I believe yellow and pink thematically are Suzie and Noelle. In a sense, they're two yin and yangs, but for Deltarune. Especially when you consider that they're the two strongest wills and that in a meta way they commentate on our urges as a player. As I said, the part of us that loves playing the hero and never wants our adventures to end, and that other part of us that's just dying to peek behind the veil and see what happens next if we were just to push a bit further and go places that we normally shouldn't. And like the characters we see donning these colors in their eyes, we've also interfaced on a plane that we don't have access to, but as to where Spamton got a taste of something from heaven, we only incrementally get a taste of the action within the world of Deltarune. And thus far, the single buffer that makes sure that our options are limited within this world has been no one else but Kris Dreamer. But time will tell how long that could last. Because after all, we all know the scariest thing in Deltarune isn't Suzie, isn't Noelle, isn't Sans, isn't Friend, or isn't even Gaster. It's, well, come on now, you already know the scariest thing in Deltarune is you. I've been coy when mentioning a certain JRPG franchise in this video, and I want to call attention to one character within it that I believe can shine a light on the whole role of Gaster. This character is very special, and it only brought me an epiphany within the last few months. Klaus, within the context of Xenoblade, became the architect of two worlds after becoming overzealous in attempting to usher in a new era of humanity. To be clear, in the context of Deltarune, I only believe Gaster to be responsible for maybe one of the worlds. However, the rest here still applies. You see, the downfall of Klaus was typical hubris, a man who tried to play God. And in his haste for seeking a revolution, he went along with an untested yet highly ambitious experiment that rendered two key parts of his essence across two universes. One man was scattered across time and space. And within the context of Xenoblade, one manifested his ego that projected all of Klaus's negative qualities and basically made a tyrannical god. But in Xenoblade 2, his regrets and humility made him play the role of a non-intervening architect who wished to atone for his selfish actions. And for the uninitiated, Xenoblade 1 and 2 are in fact parallel stories. Sorry for the spoilers to anyone who may not know, I suppose, but game's kinda about to be 10 years old, so I don't feel the worst, but sorry. Interestingly enough, in his will to see change brought about in the worlds he made, he created a failsafe of 3 units, a trinity processor, Logos, Numa, and Ontos, or as you may or may not know them as Malos, Mithra, and Alvis. And essentially, no matter what humanity does to the world, the next era that's decided by basically every human will be enacted by one of these 3. And if not explicitly by every human, the humans with the strongest will. I suppose human or creature or blade or machine in this case, because Xenoblade gets kind of nuts. However, I find another thing amazing, that being that Xenoblade also plays with concepts reminiscent of the singularity we discussed from Evangelion in our last episode. The whole idea of a body of people being able to merge and create an entirely new body or entity. And I see Kris, Noelle, and Suzie, or even Kris, Frisk, and Chara, depending on how you look at it, as a sort of trinity processor, explaining the image that I show here, where in a sense, no matter how you look at it, their fates are forever intertwined across all time and space. And I think it's particularly why I'm having this really weird obsession with these inconspicuously colored nodes in Gaster's research facility. And even this old scrapped Azrael God of Hyper Death form design that we really need to talk about in the future. We'll touch on it one day soon, but not now. Because now it's time to talk about some user submitted evidence from you guys down in the comments from our last video.
For starters, the DQ2 party lineup. You have blue armored warrior with no magic at all, a green robed mage with some fighting ability and is the only one who can use fire magic, and an all-magic sorceress with a white and purple robe whose strongest armor in the SNES fan translation is the Angel Robe of Water. The sorceress oddly often ends up with more health than the second party, despite having a much lower level, and her stronger magic absolutely outweighs his physical advantages. Both comparisons also apply to Noelle and Ralsei, as Noelle's power massively overshadows Ralsei's if you compare them on even footing. The green mage, like Ralsei, is also known for dying the most often. The sorceress also benefits from prayer rings, which restore MP, and has a Christmas-colored outfit called the Mink Mantle. All 3 characters are 2 princes and a princess. Meanwhile, Ralsei is literally a prince, Kris is a child of the Flower King, and Noelle is the daughter of a rich mayor, who might as well be a monarch as far as hometown is concerned. They're also aided by the Dragon Lord's grandson, whose true form is a purple dragon, though he does not join the party. Speaking of which, the boss at the end of DQ1 is the Dragon Lord, or King Dragon if you play the SNES translation. His form is blue in the NES version, but the original artwork showed he was meant to be purple from the start, and it's always purple in later media. Gerson's description of Chapter 1 applies perfectly to DQ1, aside from there only being one hero. I've yet to finish DQ2, but the main plot revolves around this evil priest summoning demons and attempting to cover the world in darkness. And I know DQ3 ends with entering a sealed gate in a certain town and descending into the underworld to slay the mastermind behind all the evil that occurred up to that point. There's a guy in the starting area of DQ1 who tells you about fighting monsters and gaining experience to become stronger. Same place that you get your first weapon / sword. NES version. Perhaps the most obvious connection with the Mantle game, specifically, is that going to areas, walking back and forth, killing everything you see, and using that power to be able to go to the next area to do the same is 90% of the gameplay of DQ1. There's even a point where the next enemies have too much defense to fight with your sword, but can be taken down quickly with a newly acquired fire spell. This isn't a factor in the SNES version because it's brain dead easy. There's a rare equipable item in DQ2 called the Devil's Tail. I think the official spelling is Devil's Tail, but it's spelled as Devil's Tail in the the SNES fan translation. There's also another equipable item called the Wind Mantle, similar in name to Deltarune's unused Sky Mantle. In DQ1, you combine the Sunstone and Staff of Water to create the Rainbow Drop, which you use to create a bridge to access the island where the end of the game takes place. Similar to the ending of the first board, the bridge itself is supposedly a rainbow, but it just uses the standard bridge sprite after making the screen flash different colors. In DQ2, and big and very advertised, point was that you gained a ship about a third through the game, which massively opens up the game world. This is parody in the second board. That's what I can think of right now, anyway. By the way, the Blazers part of Dragon Blazers is likely referencing a SNES ARPG called Soul Blazer. The name was originally Soul Blader in Japan, and the Japanese version of Deltarune refers to Dragon Blazers as Dragon Bladers.
I really want to thank the real Kitsune for bringing this to my attention as a casual enjoyer of Dragon Quest. I mean, it's clear that the whole Dragon Blazer parallel is huge, and I'm not fully equipped to tackle it, so I'm glad in the comments I could rely on you guys to pick up some of the slack. This was just super informative, and I think I'm going to be diving into some of the classic collection thanks to my friend here. But I have to say, guys, with my train of thought with a lot of these theories, things are going to get stranger yet stranger. So I hope all of you are excited for the very near future. Until next time, see ya.